Welcome back to It's a New Day. I'm Kim Kennedy, and it is a great pleasure to welcome Jeff Clayton, who is Executive Director of the American Bail Coalition, here in our second half hour this morning. And let me tell you a little bit about him. Jeff joined the American Bail Coalition as Policy Director in May 2015. He's worked in various capacities as a public policy and government relations professional for 15 years, and also as licensed attorney for the past 12 years. Most recently, he worked as the general counsel for the Professional Bail Agents of Colorado, in addition to serving other clients in legal, legislative, and policy matters. Jeff spent 6 years in government service representing the Colorado State Courts and Probation Department, the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment, and the U.S. Secretary of Transportation. He's also a prior Presidential Management Fellow and finalist for the U.S. Supreme Court Fellows Program. Mr. Clayton holds a BA from Baylor University, an MS Public Policy from the University of Rochester, New York, and a JD from the Stern College of Law, University of Denver. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks for having me on. When you hear that, I feel like I'm getting old.
You're a genius. You did it in half the time that everybody else did. But very interesting organization. I have to admit, I am not at all familiar with the American Bail Coalition, but you are wanting to bring this to people's attention, national attention. Can I ask, first and foremost, why?
Well, I think the question of bail and bail reform has really gotten to the point of asking the fundamental question of what is the Eighth Amendment right to bail? And it's not just about bail and bail bondsmen, which is who generally that I represent, but it's also about your right to, bail out your son, bail out your daughter, or not, and whether you're able to post bail to get them out, or whether we're going to rely on other processes like detention and government programs. So, we're engaged in, I think, a national conversation about this, and it's important that I think people hear both sides of the story.
Okay, and can you give us both sides?
Absolutely. I'll start with the side that we don't necessarily agree with. And the general movement on the other side is to eliminate all monetary conditions of bail and move to a system where, like the federal system or the District of Columbia system, where we rely on what's called preventative detention. We have the government decide who they're going to lock up. They lock them up, and then of everybody else who gets out, we put them on what's called non-monetary supervision. In other words, we e-carcerate them, as one activist would say, as an alternative. And so the other, and the reason for all of this is that, there's been some argument that it's unfair that persons who can't afford to post a bail are unable to do so, and of course they're forced to stay in jail. Is the main argument, I guess I would say, for reform. On our side, we feel like the system is imbalanced in places, but that fundamentally the right to bail is a fundamental state and federal constitutional right, and that it should not be abolished. And we can admit that in some places there should be less financial conditions of bail used, and maybe it's overused. But we think it's an important part of the system, and that we don't need to fundamentally, remake the entire bail system to address a problem of some of these low-level offenders, which we agree in many places, is a problem.
Okay. All right. So tell us, what do you think could be done better? What reforms need to be put in place?
Well, I think one of the things in bail, and I tell this story a lot because I think it really captures it, when I was attorney doing criminal defense work, when we had a bail issue, we called Joe Beanie the bail bondsman, and that was what we knew about bail. We didn't know why people were there. We didn't know why they got out of jail, and frankly, we didn't really care. And I think that's an issue in this country, is that there's no due process when it comes to bail. It becomes extremely rote, and, people can get parked in jail for a month at times, or 2 weeks at a time, without being able to see a judge in this country. And that's just plain wrong. And I think that's the one thing that we've argued from all sides that's a bipartisan solution, is judges are making these decisions, and a lot of times people can't get in front of a judge. So that's the number one thing that we think. And then the other thing I think is these people on the low end that are sort of the repeat low-level person who get ensnared on these low bonds, we need alternatives for those people. We can't help them. The bail industry can't, and neither can many of these other, forms of release of just kicking them out of jail, because we know they have mental health and drug problems that, we need to do something about. And I think dealing with that population, the truly indigent person with co-occurring disorders is something that the system needs improvement on. It's, kind of bigger than a bail issue, but causes, a bail issue.
Sounds like what you're saying, the symptoms are being treated, but not the root problem. And that these people aren't necessarily, some of them, I'm sure the ones that are dangerous criminals are being treated differently. But those who are in a different class of committing crimes, let's not just fill our jails up with these kinds of people. Let's look for permanent solutions. Do I understand you correctly?
I think that's right. And I think the best example of what we have going on right now on that issue is this opioid crisis and how it intersects with bail. Bail, a lot of families will know when the person is on an opioid problem and they're stuck in jail, they want them to be there until they can figure out what to do with them. And we see these cases all the time where the person, if there's no bail, they're able to just get out and then they go and the family has no control. And we've seen cases where, bail agents will pick up these people and take them directly to a drug treatment facility. And if we just say, is this person poor and indigent, we're going to lose some people in that process. And I think, that's another reason why we need to take a look at this.
I agree. And I'd really like to hear your opinion, Jeff, because as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, this, to me, is a clear example of why big government doesn't work, and a clear example when it's practiced where local communities, individuals, people's organizations get involved in a problem are much better at solving it. I know of, for instance, my own church has a counseling program, and if they could be pulled in to work with the local jail, to create some kind of program. And other agencies out there, I know of several, and because not just one can help. What are your thoughts on that idea?
Yeah, I think that's good. And we've seen these charitable bail funds, but that's just kind of an offshoot of what you're saying, which is that local communities can and should handle this problem. And a lot of times they do. We've seen, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, we've seen unions that have funds for their members to make sure that they can get back to work. As you've said, we've seen churches and various community organizations come together and use bail to fight a problem. In the era of civil rights over the years, we've seen bail bondsmen and non-bail bondsmen come together to fight, abuses in jailing policies. So I think bail is a core, associational right as well for the community, and I think that's why it's important. And as you said, I think no government program is going to replace the relationships and institutions that you can build within the community to solve some of these problems.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you have described as the Laura and John Arnold Foundation risk assessment algorithm, what that is, and why there's some pushback against that?
Yep, and I would say this issue in criminal justice, the idea that we're going to use computers to predict human behavior is the hottest issue right now going. The Arnold Foundation is trying to predict whether people are going to commit a new crime or fail to appear in court. And what we've seen is some situations that violate the common sense test, labeling people who are prior felons in possession of firearm as low risk. And then on the other hand, cases where people appear to be low risk, but they're being preventatively detained. And I think there's also been questions of whether these are race and gender neutral, whether they exacerbate bias rather than serve to reduce it in the system. And I think it's largely unregulated. The Arnold Foundation has contracts with all these entities, and they're trying to stop anybody from kind of getting behind the curtain of how these were put together and this sort of thing, which has triggered leading academics from around the country to say that we need to shine a light on that. So that's another component to all of this, which is that the idea that we're going to use computers now to predict human behavior, sort of like that the old Tom Cruise movie of a couple of years ago.
Minority Report, huh?
Exactly.
Is that being used anywhere successfully at this time? And can you point to anywhere in the world where that's being done?
For my money, I don't think we can predict human behavior accurately enough to make individual decisions. That's what it comes down to. We can decide what the tolerances are, but for example, in the Arnold Foundation's highest risk category, it's calibrated to where less than 50% of those people are going to actually be high risk. In other words, we're getting it wrong more than we're getting it right. Other tools in sentencing we've seen, they're 60% accurate. And for my money, I just don't think that we can adequately make decisions about a human being based on these. All we're doing is plugging people into different boxes, but I don't think that really helps us do a better job. So the Arnold Foundation is in, I forget how many jurisdictions, 35 around the country. And so this is going on, and the public largely has not been fixated on it yet. But because of Facebook and all this other stuff, using the DNA research databases for family history by the police and FBI to identify the Golden Gate Killer, all this stuff is combining into an issue of, is this big data and criminal justice the right thing?
As you're speaking, Jeff, WFYL, I'm sure you checked us out, our website, and you saw that we are a conservative talk station, but we are bent towards faith as well, that being the Christian faith. And when, we uphold the same pillars that we believe God established for the best society. Perfect it is not, because no human being is perfect, but, the family, the church, the community. And I'm sure you can cite better than I can that kids who were raised in strong families, community active, have some kind of faith-based, are kids who fare much better in life than kids who are in what they call alternative lifestyles, families, etc. There's all kinds of names out there. And we advocate on air for a return to that model to get America back to performing at its highest peak that it can, and seeing people, find why do you do drugs and alcohol and the purpose to the degree that you want to end your life? And those are very deep questions. And we feel that in a society that has become more and more state-oriented, government-oriented, and has pushed faith out of the picture, well, we're eating the fruit of that. There are some things there are needs that the state cannot meet, the most deepest needs of the heart. I know you're not a pastor. I don't want to, ask you to give a sermon or anything, but have you read statistics of the same yourself that support the ideas that I just put forth?
Well, yeah, and certainly I went to, Baylor University, so I have a little insight on this. What I would say is what we're doing in criminal justice and with these big government programs is we lock in a particular mentality. And in the case of these risk assessments, what we would be creating from a Christian's perspective would be an unforgivable factor. It's exactly what you said. In one of these risk algorithms, the age at which you first got arrested is the highest risk factor determining what's going to happen for the rest of your life on these algorithms. And it cannot be changed. It doesn't matter how remorseful you were. It doesn't matter if you were convicted. It doesn't matter if you've, gotten over your drug problem. None of it matters. And I think that is contrary to this country. It's contrary to what it should be, that you could be locked in permanently by conduct and we're never going to ask anything else, I think is a problem. And I think that's what we're seeing in attempts of social engineering is to engineer away from the values that I think, make this country great and make it what it is.
I agree, because we're getting to a point we're going to be locking up, 3/4 of the population. And I don't think that's an exaggeration, because I think an official at the CDC said we are at epidemic proportions. And I don't think those people would be given to hyperbole and would not make that statement lightly. So getting to the heart of the issue is very important. But I also think in this is a call for listeners and all listening to say we can all be a part of the solution. What are your thoughts on that as you have investigated this? Obviously, you've put a lot of time and thought into this matter.
Absolutely. I think there's a couple of things going on. One, I think the main point of criminal justice is we want compensation, rehabilitation, and some remorse, right? You want your stuff back more than you want the guy to get locked up and punished at a certain level. And we've gotten away from that. That's the essence of why we do what we do, is to protect the public when a crime happens, to make sure that they get compensation, and also to deter, the people from doing it, because they know there's going to be, consequences for doing that. So the other thing is a lack of civil justice to resolve some of these, right? We've over-criminalized these low-level things where we ensnare people in all these different consequences, and then we cry to ourselves that we're putting poor people through a system that's over-incarcerating them, blah, 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 for failure to pay things like traffic fines. So we've lost the balance, I think. We've tipped it toward over-criminalization and then thinking, oh, we'll just call these people who commit these low-level crimes criminals, and that'll solve the problem. And yet at the same time, we don't want to hold them accountable because we feel sorry for them because we're poor. So I think there's a better balance that we can strike in terms of making sure that we focus on the fundamentals, which is protecting victims of crime first as the number one thing that we do in public safety.
Great point, because you're talking about on the other side of the coin, there are those who do commit violent crimes. We see this with the illegal situation where there's serious questions about the type of people that are coming into the country. And there's a lot of non-information out there about that. And they're released under the new bail reform laws. I think California is kind of crazy about that. There's concern for public safety. Do you see anything, any reforms there happening? Anything good coming of that, since unfortunately some of these well-publicized murders across the country have happened?
Yeah, I'm not sure how much bail either exaggerates or heightens that problem. Obviously, sort of catch and release policies will magnify any impact you have of these offenders continuing to commit crimes. And I think the best example are misdemeanor crimes, and the best example is really DUI. If you don't want to get a DUI in this country, you don't have to. You just move around. You can move from state to state, and no nationwide warrant's going to go out for you as long as it's a misdemeanor DUI. And I think that folks that are illegally in this country can exploit that loophole like anybody who is legally here, although obviously people who are legally here are generally less transient than people who are legally here. So I think that creates a certain loophole at the misdemeanor and the repeat crime level, just because the federal government doesn't have the resources to chase these people across state lines, and state governments don't have the resources to chase these people across state lines. And without bail and bail bondsmen chasing them across state lines, I can tell you in my experience, nobody's going to chase them across state lines. And that's a major loophole that they can exploit.
It sure is, because I know there's just too many situations where, a young man was killed and he was a legal resident, a citizen. This man had 19 DUIs, and it's how was he out driving? He was an accident waiting to happen. It took a life. I can't help but think in that situation, the people who let him out of jail are as culpable as the person who actually killed him.
Absolutely, and we're not in the DUI world really focusing on the population we need to focus on, and it's those guys that are just going to continue. They're not going to realize they have an alcohol problem on the first or second one and do something about it. They're just going to thumb their nose at the system, and we're going to let them get away with it. Maybe we need a federal DUI, law for that reason.
Okay. What are the most pressing reforms that are needed in the bail program from your point of view?
Well, obviously, I think this idea that we could do something about the folks at the low end, the repeat ones, as I've said, and as I said before, I think the answer to that is more mental health and substance abuse diversion programs. We've advocated for that because these are repeat customers. Let's just put it that way, and they're not repeat customers of the bail bondsman because they're at the lowest level where the bail bondsman knows they're not going to do anything. They know it's going to be a really difficult case to chase these guys around on these low dollars, and that it just doesn't make sense, and that we need other alternatives for them. So that's one thing. We've talked about the idea that perhaps some states should look at an expansion of denial without bail in some of these cases. Some states, don't have preventative detention for certain sex offenses, high-level sex offenses, and other serious offenses that I think, is something we should look at. And I think, frankly, I would argue that taking a look at the computerization of the system in bail and the rest of it is probably something that, while I don't have a solution, is something that we ought to be talking about. And that goes for all other areas of the criminal justice where we're using these, from policing to parole to child dependency and neglect to probation and all this sort of stuff.
Sounds like would help agencies not only within a state but across the country communicate much more quickly and efficiently.
Yeah, that's certainly an issue, and also the warrants. I mean, as I mentioned, this holes in the idea that you can commit a misdemeanor and go to another state, and there's no warrant in that other state for which they're able to hold you, and that's something that is a federal issue, but also a state resource issue because the states don't have the money to hold these people accountable, and so literally that's how they just move from state to state, and I think that's an issue that the federal government should look at.
Well, this is an issue that needs to be addressed. And I'm glad that you brought it to our attention because I had not really given much thought before. Listeners, I would encourage you to stay in touch with this issue. You can do that at AmericanBailCoalition.com. And we're going to ask Jeff to keep us informed when there are important updates that you think, Jeff, that our listeners would need to know about.
Absolutely. It'd be my pleasure.
Okay. Thank you for visiting with us today. Besides AmericanBailCoalition.com, do you have a Facebook page that people can like and check out as well?
Absolutely. Go check us out on Facebook, American Bail Coalition.
Okay. We've been visiting today with Jeff Clayton with American Bail Coalition. Once again, that is AmericanBailCoalition.com. Jeff, thank you for the update.
Thank you. Have a good day.
And you as well.